All right, welcome to the Measure Up podcast. Today, we're going to explore the future of marketing measurement and how that affects marketers and analysts. And my guest today has unique insights into this topic. Rick O'Toole is the co-founder and CTO of Rockerbox, a marketing attribution platform. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Hey, Jim. Really appreciate you having me on today. Really excited to kind of dig into a lot of what Rockerbox has been working on and how we've been helping and working with marketers over the changing ecosystem of the last 4 or 5 years. So I view this as like an awesome platform. Really excited to kind of reach your audience and be able to share a lot of what we've been talking about with our customers and prospects at Rockerbox over the last few years, and kind of be able to talk about this more broadly with everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And there has been like growing conversations around what's changing, right? Like we're all used to multi-touch attribution for the past 10 years and everything that, the Googles and the other major platforms have been sort of pushing towards us. So how have you seen the conversation developing over the past, 4 or 5 years?
I think that there's been a ton that's gone into this. So there's obviously regulation that has impacted the industry in a pretty major way. So there's been different periods of regulation and different types of regulation that I'd say have taken place. So there's kind of like governmental regulation that's impacted the industry, and that started initially in Europe with GDPR, and essentially regulating how you could share and use data. And then there was also industry regulation. So Apple kind of put regulations on App Store, how you could use data within the App Store. And then in the US, CCPA also kind of introduced a new form of regulation here in the US that also impacted marketers.
And it seems like almost every week there's a new state introducing legislature or signing into law legislature, or it's like the sign is on the sign is on the wall. What's the saying? The writing is on the
The
wall.
writing, writing's on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, the states are starting to kind of all kind of follow suit, similar types of legislation, similar to GDPR or CCPA. Yeah, that's kind of I feel the same way. Like that's kicked it off and maybe provided the right sort of sentiment among people for Apple to come in and say, we are the saviors of privacy, kind of taking that, whether you believe that they take it to heart or if it's just sort of their marketing,
Yeah.
Like they've definitely gone full bore on that, right? And so you have ATT, ITP, iOS 14.5, like all of these things that are taking what we've thought was, thought that we had for the past 10 years, all this data at the user level, all their impressions that they viewed of our ads and clicked on and everything they've done on our websites and in our apps. And that's starting to kind of fall apart.
Yeah. So I think you've kind of hit on like the two sides of what's changed here. Regulation being kind of that first thing that spurred on a lot of this, and then technology being the second component of this that's stepped in with the ATT, ITP, which are essentially limitations on the technology themselves. So really, Apple came in and kind of in 2001 started changing the way that data could actually be used on devices, in browsers, and changing the way that a lot of the industry has operated for quite a while. So I kind of view regulation as being kind of like, the ground rules of essentially how businesses can structure their business, how you can use data, how you can use it and combine it with other pieces of data. Can you sell data? Can you not sell data? Can you use it for targeting? And that's really what regulation was going after, was saying like, hey, we want to crack down on like how this information is being used. But the technology actually stepped in and restricted what was capable. And the big and most impactful change, I'd say, over the last 4 years for the broader ecosystem has been the change to mobile. Really with ATT stepping in and kind of removing the way that identifier works. I'm sure everyone that has an Apple device has clicked, either yes or no to allowing to track. I
Mostly
think
no.
the stats say it's something like, less than 20% click yes. So it's
Yeah.
kind of put the death of that identifier as something that folks have been using for targeting and for tracking. But it really has moved us in a direction that I think is positive for the industry in general. So I think for a period of time, there was a lot of this buying and selling of data or using it in a way that, the end user and customer didn't necessarily have control over. And a lot of that has continued to change over time. But I think the other thing that's important to note is really both the technology and the regulation have really tried to be targeted at a specific segment of how data gets used. And this is really third party relationships with data. So if you think about an advertiser being kind of like the first party, a customer comes to your website, they're going through the process of making a purchase. That's considered first party information. The information that you're collecting along the way is kind of that relationship between the advertiser and the customer. And when it becomes a third party, it's exchanging that information with some other entity, like a Facebook or a Google or some other tool that you might be using. And really, both regulation and technology have tried to crack down on the exchange of information on that third party side. So it's saying, like, after you've collected this information, who can you share it with? How can you share it? And not necessarily trying to, there is some regulation around first party, and GDPR is more restrictive in like where the data can be stored and other things. But really, most of it has been trying to crack down on that relationship with third party entities and the sharing of data across different places.
Right, which has now kind of reintroduced these silos, right? You have the Facebook walled garden, the Google walled garden, and like what we've been sort of used to for a while now of being able to do this kind of cross-channel attribution is really kind of starting to, become siloed again. And we have to have additional ways and methods to be able to understand what's working and what's not across the channels, not just within the channels.
Exactly. And I think like this is has been a big focus of Rockerbox. As soon as we kind of entered into this marketing measurement space, we've looked at it through the lens of first party data and how do we operate on behalf of an advertiser. Like our goal and our mission is basically to put the advertiser in control of understanding how they measure their marketing. So everything has really been first party. It's not been about, trying to join third-party sources of data together to get good signals on this. It's really been, using the information that a marketer can collect with their own pixel on site, with their own access to that user information, with their e-commerce data. How do you construct a data set that helps an advertiser analyze and understand that marketing?
Right. So I'm curious. So in the early days of Rockerbox, was it more sort of multi-touch attribution focused or attribution focused? And then you guys have kind of made that shift over into, we'll talk about in a second, like the marketing mix modeling and the MMM for Spotify that you guys have introduced. But have you kind of been just focusing as things have changed, kind of making that pivot there?
So I think it's actually a combination of things. So I think like MTA, dialing back 15 years ago, was introduced as a way to do third-party attribution. It was, hey, we have this problem where someone believes that there's like this post-view event that someone served an ad on, the Yahoo homepage, and a marketer or Yahoo believes that they should get credit for that ad for a conversion event. And I think MTA really became more nuanced even before the point of regulation and everything else that happened. And that like what you're really trying to understand is a path to purchase. And it's not necessarily this deterministic path to purchase that is necessary to understand how a user interacts with the marketing and ultimately interacts with your site and then converts. So I think like MTA for us has always been this idea that there's this bottoms up data set that marketers are really after, and being able to build that bottoms up data set for customers so that they can perform analyses on top of that. And it's really been heavily focused in on, how do channels overlap with each other? How do they interplay with each other? And how ultimately, like in the scenario where you have information that indicates that there's overlap and interplay, how do you value the overlap and interplay between those channels? So that's been really our focus for kind of that like first 2.5 years in the attribution space, was helping to understand that problem. And it's a fairly technical problem as well. So we've kind of like focused in on a lot of the technology for collecting that information, for being able to organize it correctly and be able to tie it back to the spend that you have in an ad platform. And those have been significant challenges, but we've really started to look at the broader problem that marketers are having outside of just that bottoms up data set and the analyses that you can do on it.
Right. Yeah. And there's a lot of talk, and I see a lot of posts on LinkedIn in the recent months around, and even years, really, a couple of last 12, 18 months around, maybe we don't just kill off multi-touch attribution, but we use it, we use that along with marketing mix modeling, along with incrementality testing to really kind of triangulate the what's really happening, right? See where the methods agree, where they disagree, what we need to test into, and not just necessarily like saying, oh, it's dead, it's broken, we can't use it, but it's still providing possibly some signal. It's just making sure that we use that with that sort of mindset of like everything that we're doing is not the truth, right? They're all
Yeah.
wrong to some degree or another, but how can
Yeah.
we use them together to really kind of inform our decisions?
Yeah, it's really what is the role that this type of analysis plays in how you run your marketing. And I think that there was a time where folks believed that MTA was going to be the solution for all of your marketing decisions. So, like, you would be able to collect all of the data bottoms up deterministically and make a, really informed decision around the state of the world. It was kind of for lack of better analogy, like the TSA or whatever, like the information state, like, hey, we're going to collect all of this really granular information and it's going to create this perfect data set. And basically, that's never really been the case with MTA. It's been like an ideal that I think has been out there, but Rockerbox has never approached it through that idealistic lens. We've always looked at it as how do we do this in a way that kind of is a representative of the advertiser, his first party, and also incorporates probabilistic information into that path to purchase. So you're getting a good understanding of how do all of these components of marketing fit into a user path and help you perform kind of these analyses that you might want, whether it's optimization or overlap or other things, to be able to make the right decisions around the questions that those analyses can help answer. So when you're running Facebook, how much branded search do you need? Like that's still a really open question that MTA is really best set up to solve. Like there's other methods that you could probably get at, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a significant overlap between navigational advertising and advertising that is trying to bring in new customers. And yeah, MTA definitely has a role in that. And I do think that there's actually like this other shift in the industry where MTA is probably going to become increasingly important for customers, or an MTA like data set for customers to have in their possession to be able to make these types of decisions going forward.
Interesting. So talk a little bit about that. You say there might be some industries or some types of businesses where it might become more important. What do you see there?
So I think that there's kind of like a lot of stock on GA3 right now as like a core piece of technology, and Google is kind of looking at the writing on the wall. So GA, by its nature, is a third-party cookie space tool that basically, they kind of put a pixel on your site and they help you track sources of users coming in and ultimately, how those customers flow on site. And basically the changes that Apple made on Safari for changing the way that third-party cookies operate, as well as the changes that Google's proposing to make in Chrome browser, are similarly going to have that impact, where it'll become further and further restricted. So a lot of the baseline that folks have relied upon for a very long time for making these decisions, kind of GA's been around at least as long as I can remember on the internet. It's been like part of, the core way that you have a website, you put GA on, and it's been somewhat consistent over time. And I do think that GA4 is really going to change the nature and the composition of that data set in a pretty fundamental way that it's just different. It's doing a lot more of the stuff server side. It's integrating more deeply, and it's going to take more effort for an advertiser to set up, or a different set of tools, and it's probably going to produce a different set of baselines that change over time.
Yeah, you're speaking my language now. This is in my line of work. We're doing so much of this now. Is the July 1st deadline for GA3 comes, where it's going to stop collecting data on July 1st for the free users. We've been doing a lot of work with clients to get them migrated to GA4 and help them understand all the things that they could do with that, exporting the data to BigQuery, where they could, do whatever they want with it and make it more business specific. But then, yeah, you also have, I have to be careful not to go down into my, start ranting about, about GA4, but, you know, the things that they've also been doing in coordination with that, like, the announcement they made recently where they're deprecating um, all of the different multi-touch attribution models other than last click and data-driven attribution. And I can't remember if it's also first click, if they're still keeping first click or maybe not. I think it's just last click and
I
data
think first
attribution.
click is going away as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So no more linear, no more time decay, no more custom. It's just either last click or data-driven. So they're kind of shifting, and this is just one example of where they're sort of shifting things to be, I hate this term, but like a little bit more black box. It's just like, oh, trust us, Um, and
And
yeah,
yeah, I think Google's actually in a pretty tough position because for regulation that's out there that's governing kind of who can help make these decisions and how they operate with that data. They're actually in a position where being able to tie together a longer path to purchase, they're not necessarily doing that just purely based on behalf of the advertiser. With GA4, they're going to have a hard case to make that, like, hey, we're not using this data anywhere else outside of GA4. I think Google has always, with Google Analytics, kind of used those identifiers going across many different sites. So I think that they're in a position where you kind of touched on like the deprecation of first click. And part of the reason why I believe that they're doing that is they don't necessarily have confidence that they're going to be able to accurately identify that first click that might happen in a user's path to purchase, and not necessarily have a strong identifier that goes all the way back in time to help them, tie that path together.
yeah, exactly. Like back to Apple and the stuff they're doing with Safari, the client ID cookie that identifies a user on the web used to be a 2-year expiration, right? And now Safari says, nope, 7 days.
Yep.
So if someone
Yeah.
comes to your site today and then they come back 8 days later, they're a brand new user. You've never seen them before, right? So
Exactly. And that's a huge portion of the problem that we've helped a lot of our customers solve, either with an A record or CNAME, and basically the way that we represent Rockerbox is really as that data processor on behalf of the advertiser. So all of the data that gets collected on a customer's website is basically that customer's data. It's never kind of being shared outside of the scope of that one customer, and that puts us in a bucket where that information can be tied together on a longer time horizon. So we're subject to the first party cookie expiration policies that Safari puts in place, and kind of elongates that. And I think Google is kind of suffering in this like gray middle area where it's like, okay, we're not necessarily, we know that we're not a first party collector of data because we're Google. So we're in this third party bucket, and that's kind of forced their move to be much more server side, much more identifier centric, or customer identifier centric in GA4. But it creates a lot of these challenges and issues that you're bringing up.
yeah, absolutely. So kind of one question that I've been asking myself frequently, at least once a week over the past many, many months, as I kind of think through all of these issues that we've just been talking about with multi-touch attribution is like, do you think there will ever reach a point, or maybe we've already reached a point, or it will ever reach a point in the future where multi-touch attribution provides no value or actively misleads us?
Uh, no, I think that like it really depends on what the definition of multi-touch attribution is. So I think like as Rockerbox has kind of defined it, it's being able to rely on some bottoms up user level analysis to inform your marketing. And that's I think like MTA has taken on a lot of different meetings, but there's no other way of like, and we've been discussing like, is MTA the right title for analyzing a user's path to purchase and helping a marketer make decisions off of it. But I think like it is still the thing that resonates most directly is like, yeah, there's multiple touches, there's multiple advertisements. So I think like as a concept, MTA will be around, and as a term, MTA will be around. But the nature of that data set, what goes into it, moving to be more probabilistic, to be much more first party, is going to be the key for making MTA, something that a customer can still rely on. So I think, yeah, it really just comes down to the role that it plays, and making sure that a customer is making the right decisions off of kind of a bottoms up data set.
Right. And having some sort of trust in the data, right?
Yeah.
The fact like it is bottoms up, and can we rely on that data? Are we sure that we were able to tie all of the touch points back to a single user?
Yeah.
Which I feel like that's the big question is, you know, and we had this question even before GDPR and Apple
Yes.
started taking this. It's like, you know, there were the studies out there that showed like people use on average X number of devices per day. It's like their
Yeah.
phone, their laptop, their computer. Like, even before GDPR, there was always this issue of like, oh, you browse from your computer and then you go to your phone and you make the purchase, and like that
Yeah.
breaks the chain, right? So
Exactly. And I think that that's been the challenge of the way that some companies are kind of like the idea of MTA emerged is, hey, we're going to have this like perfect data set that's a source of truth that, you know, has every touch point and measures everything well. And the reality of it is no, like that's not the way that that data in general works. There's always nuance in data. There's always cleanliness of data. There's always gaps in data. And as a marketer, you need to understand what those gaps are if you're dealing with user level data. But MTA is still going to have the opportunity to be the best form of click tracking in the future. So as we kind of look at what the changes are kind of across the board with third party analytics, having a first party data set that's able to capture that and then ultimately build and roll up into something is going to be a strong baseline that customers are going to continue to need going forward.
yeah, yeah, and there's still, as far as I understand, there's still no method or tool that's better for providing marketers that sort of very granular day to day level information to make decisions in the platforms to kill off this campaign, add more budget to that campaign, change these
Exactly.
keywords, right? Like you can't get that out of marketing mix modeling or incrementality testing at certain granular levels. So
Exactly. It really comes down to granularity and end user for marketing. So there's lots of folks that need marketing measurement, and they don't necessarily all have the same decision that they're making. So yeah, like the big one that you just hit on is that optimization, like in channel optimization. You need signal to do in channel optimization. And if third party platforms don't necessarily have a consistent signal or you're not sure about that, you need to have some baseline that you can turn to that helps you inform the decisions that you're making. And MTA has been the primary mechanism that our customers turn to. So it's like, hey, GA data showed this falling off the cliff, or kind of the change in Facebook around a year ago, where the restriction of buckets that were available for measurement on as part of ATT caused Facebook performance to fall off. Well, the MTA data stayed constant during that time. So customers were able to have a consistent baseline that they were able to use during this time where, all the other data was kind of showing a negative trend or a downward trend, and MTA data was continuing to show, hey, the clicks are still coming through. Even though cookie policy changed for third-party cookies for GA and for Facebook, and their ability to measure, being in this first-party cookie space gave you something consistent where you could say, oh, that campaign is still performing, even though we're seeing actually it start to peter off in other areas. So it's been a really valuable tool for customers to be able to make those more granular optimizations.
absolutely. So kind of moving away from MTA, right? I think about this as like a pendulum swinging, right? Like you think pre-digital, right? Pre-internet, like this term I've been seeing a lot lately on LinkedIn and elsewhere, like the dark funnel, right? So like pre-digital, everything was a dark funnel. Like you didn't
Yeah,
know who saw your ad, if it caused them to go into your store and buy whatever, right? So everything was a dark funnel. And then, internet explodes, digital marketing starts taking the stage, and the pendulum swings over into like, oh, we can track everything about everyone, right? Sort of that
yeah,
fallacy, but like that, we can track
yeah,
people, and now we have multi-touch attribution, and we can kind of do that very granular tracking. And now with GDPR and Apple and the changes that they've introduced, like I feel like the pendulum is sort of swinging back towards the like, oh no, it's going back to the dark funnel. We can't see everything like we used to.
Yeah.
And with that, you start to see the rise or the resurgence of popularity of methods like marketing mix modeling that's been around for decades.
Yeah.
Other opportunities for understanding marketing performance like incrementality testing, and really kind of using those all together. Um, I think I already know your answer to this, but the one question I was going to ask you is: do you see marketing mix modeling taking the place of MTA or supplementing it?
Yeah, I think that they're really complementary. So I think that they actually, and I think that we discussed this a little bit, but they're really they're answering different questions. So when we look at marketing mix modeling, you're trying to answer a higher level question around, hey, is this channel or is this channel strategy working for us? And MTA is going much more granular. It's going at that smaller problem of, hey, how do I optimize campaigns within a channel? How do I make sure that I'm making the right day-to-day decisions? So I think that MMM definitely does have a resurgence right now. And I think part of it is that MMM as a term, to your point, has been around for decades, but I think that it's actually a lot more nuanced. So as we really started to unpack, okay, like MMM, really what you're describing with MMM is it's like a statistical set of methods that have some assumptions in it tailored really well to the marketing domain. So it's like, okay, what do marketers believe about marketing? And
Yeah,
MMM is just saying like, hey, let's take everything that marketers believe about marketing and make sure that we have some level of control in the statistical model that we build. So unlike
exactly.
something like a linear regression where it's just like, hey, we're just looking for correlation between, spend and revenue. MMM is really saying like, hey, we have all of these other things that we believe about marketing, and let's make sure that that's in the model.
Exactly. Yeah, we have ad stock to try to mimic the real world behavior of decay rate. Like someone sees a commercial today and maybe they remember it the next day or the next week, and it kind of has this this sort of decay over time. And so yeah, we're just really trying to use a bunch of fancy math to create a model that mimics the real world.
Exactly. And I think like that's been kind of what's behind a bit behind the resurgence of MMM is one, we're able to kind of like fit different things now. So before MMM was it had all of those assumptions in it. So it had ad stock, it had saturation, it had decay, like it had these different concepts in it, but it was heavily assumption driven. So you would come and say like, okay, what is my assumption about the way that TV interacts? And ad stock wasn't necessarily something that you could learn as part of the model. So you would build the model, you would have your inputs, you would have your outputs, and what you would really be looking for is like a very specific coefficient that says like, okay, how does given the model that I've set up, how does this respond, and how should I tune this one coefficient, which is like its relationship with spend, but the other stuff kind of stayed constant. And I think like over the past 10 years, machine learning tool set and all the other things that go into it has made the ability to tune all of these other parameters something that's possible in the model.
Yeah,
So when we think about ad stock or saturation or other things that might go into the model, these are all now tunable parameters. And it actually, on one hand, makes the models like significantly more accurate at being able to kind of describe the past and predict the future. But it's not necessarily simple. So I think like there was a world where it was simpler back in the day where yeah you knew all of the assumptions of how a billboard would function or how TV would function or how Facebook would function. But I think today it's actually there's a lot more nuance that goes into understanding how those channels actually represent themselves.
yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about MMM for Shopify, which is something that Rockerbox rolled out. Let's see if my notes are right. Was that in April of this year?
Yeah. So yeah, MMM for Shopify is kind of us looking at the market and saying where can we have the biggest impact with introducing MMM and do it in a way that is enabling us to make the assumptions necessary to give a good result. So I think like traditionally MMM has been a really consultative sell.
Mhm.
So it's been a process where you work with the customer, you have to understand all of the components of really their product or how they anticipate consumer behavior leading to purchase. And then you take all of those assumptions and you try to collect all of the information necessary to build a model that describes that output. With Shopify, we're able to simplify a lot. So we're able to go through a process of saying like, okay, we know that the conversion event is going to happen online. So unlike, CPG that might be happening where kind of ad stock might take a long time to work, for e-commerce, we know, okay, what are the general bounds for ad stock? We're not going to have a 50-day ad stock parameter for Facebook campaigns for e-commerce. For CPG, it might be a completely different story. And that's something
Yeah.
that we'll dig into and look at in the future. But
Or even
by
like
limiting it to Shopify.
Yeah, or even like B2B SaaS, right? It could be I have a client that it's it's an 18-month sales cycle. So it's like
Exactly.
that's a little tricky.
Exactly. So if your MMM assumption is 2 years of data, 18 months, you're kind of like bumping up against what's the maximum that we could really have for ad stock to influence conversion at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I remember when I first saw the announcement back in April, um, my first like kind of initial reaction was like, that's too bad. It's just for Shopify. But as I thought about it more, I'm thinking like that's actually kind of brilliant, right? You've narrowed your focus in a way that makes it, you know, easier, right? Because your assumptions, like you mentioned, are sort of a lot more consistent, right? It's not like you're going, well, there's this B2B SaaS client, and here's this e-commerce D2C customer, and here's this other, whatever. Um, so it's like very, in terms of kind of building out the product, you're very focused. It's a lot easier. You're dealing primarily, I'm assuming, with D2C e-commerce um, customers where I'm assuming, again, I'm going to make a ton of assumptions here. Correct me
Yeah.
if any of them are wrong, but a lot of them are probably just primarily doing digital marketing, right? They're not doing linear TV, out of home, direct mail, that kind of stuff. So like you have all of the data easily accessible. Yeah, I'm sure you've built in strong pipelines and data warehouses where you can kind of collect all of that very, very frequently, daily or more, or something like that, where it's all, you have the transformations that need to happen to them, and it kind of all feeds into the system. It's like all very consistent, and because you focused so narrowly on that one segment, right, which is probably still a pretty big segment.
Yeah.
You've just kind of like nailed it, right? You're able to provide a product that's very, very effective, very useful for that segment of customers. And then maybe even now you expand out from there. But yeah, I thought that was just really, really smart.
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head with our approach here is we realize that MMM kind of has that consultative effort that goes into it to really need to understand all of the nuances of how we anticipate the marketing channel functioning, how we anticipate the conversion event happening, how to deal with, sales or other promotions. And Shopify enabled us to simplify a lot of those things, at least initially. So we were able to zero in and say, okay, how much of these other effects like sales or holiday periods or other things could we get directly from, one source of data? And it turns out like most of the effects that we would want to put in on that are non-marketing effects we could get either from macroeconomic or from the Shopify data set. And then same thing on the marketing side, we can go through and make a lot of assumptions around the things we were talking about, like ad stock or saturation or other things that fit into those buckets that are pretty consistent. And by simplifying the problem that way, it's allowed us to kind of look at this and say, okay, we can deliver this type of MMM offering to a much larger cross section of customers because we've limited the scope, and we can provide a lot more value to a lot more people, at least initially. And then we can go through and start to build out, okay, like how would we want to handle promotional periods, or how would we want to handle a more complex conversion funnel in the future and be able to focus in on that problem, or how do we want to handle linear TV in a more robust way and focus in on that problem. But kind of separating those things out so that we're not dealing with all of those things simultaneously, which is what most folks that are performing MMM analysis today are ultimately tasked with and are struggling with as part of something that isn't necessarily scalable.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you see a lot of adoption of MMM for Shopify? Do you have clients using it actively and getting some good feedback from that?
Yeah, so we have, I think, of the Shopify customers, over 60% have opted in to MMM for Shopify or have expressed significant interest in it. And we've been kind of taking it slow with moving people from kind of getting to the point where we match their expectations. So there is still an element of tuning, but we feel pretty confident in the ability to kind of get the full system with the refresh cadence and all the other things that we want in place. And then the other thing that we've been thinking about for these customers is ultimately how do we take this and make this data actionable. So I think that that's the other component of MMM that has been kind of difficult to triangulate is like, okay, folks want MMM. It's giving them, this ROI number, this output that says like, hey, this is how the marketing channel is performing. But on a day to day or month to month basis, how does a customer actually use it? And that's been something that we've been heavily leaning into is how do we take and use this as a budgeting tool or a cross channel allocation tool to help inform how an organization might run the rest of their marketing, because ultimately they came to Rockerbox for something that's much more optimization focused and kind of granular in nature. And how do you take top down and lay it on top of granular? So that's been a big component of what we've been focused on.
Yeah, you hit on a few points there that kind of lead into the next kind of topic or set of questions, which is around, how do you think about building sort of a single platform that has all of this complexity to it, right? Like, everyone's used to the Google Analytics where they go and they get their attribution numbers and Google just kind of tells them. But now we're, everyone's saying, well, multi-touch attribution isn't the only thing you should be using. You should also look at marketing mix modeling and maybe some incrementality testing. And you're starting to kind of build this all together into a single platform. So, talk a little bit about the challenges with adding all of that complexity into your tool, and how do you make it simple for marketers to use?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that we've focused in on here is that um, this is not like an easy thing for an advertiser to necessarily know what they need. So I think like some customers come to us and they're looking for MTA and they're trying to use MTA for high level budget allocation, or they come to us for MMM and they're looking for in channel optimization. And I think what we're trying to do at a more macro level is provide the right analysis for the right decision that the customer is trying to make. And then use the decisions that they're making to link those things together. So that's been kind of our guiding principle is like, what do we need to answer this specific question in the best way possible? And then how do we use the answer to that question to inform other decisions that they're making? So that's kind of been the basis of how do we remove complexity is how do we make sure that the product is oriented towards answering specific questions for advertisers rather than saying like, hey, you could use MTA for budget allocation, but you could also use MMM or you could use incrementality. Like I think that that's a really dangerous approach because it just leads to a lot of confusion for customers. Even though there is a reality where like customers are doing lots of different things to make those decisions, but really what we're trying to do is carve out how do you want to focus MMM? And for us, it's been on forecasting and budget allocation across channel. And then how do we want to position MTA? And it's really on that optimization and overlap and making sure that we separate out the two worlds so that as you make one set of decisions, it leads into the next as a way to simplify that complexity that's arisen.
Yeah, I applaud you because I know it's marketers are fickle, and we like to have that the silver bullet tool that just tells us what to do, and trying to build a tool that satisfies that that need and does so in an elegant way is I'm sure a very big challenge. It's one that keeps you up at night or keeps you busy during the day at least.
For sure.
So I want to round things up here, wrap things up, and I like to end the podcast with an action item. So one thing that marketers and analysts listening can do immediately after they go and leave a rating and review for the podcast. What's one thing that they could do right now to think about improving their marketing or improving their craft?
So I think one of the things that we've noticed with a lot of advertisers, and this probably resonates with a lot of the folks that you work with as well, is kind of removing the time it takes to assemble reporting. That's been a big component of one of the challenges that we solve for a lot of people. And I think like one of the things that Rockerbox offers is we actually have a free offering for just doing data consolidation for folks, where they can go through, click in, and kind of consolidate data across the standard API integrations, rockerbox.com/free. You can kind of sign up and basically do that data consolidation. But I think that having data consolidated opens up a lot of opportunity for making decisions in a data driven way. If you're kind of logging into different platforms or different places to try to make decisions around things and doing that, or you need to send reporting to CFO on a monthly cadence, or you need to prepare and share it with the broader organization, and you haven't kind of put automation at the forefront of that, it's just a huge time suck. So that's kind of like our plug,
Yeah.
not necessarily the full Rockerbox the platform, but I view that as just something where we can provide a lot of value and help kind of any marketer on the consolidation side.
I love that. And I didn't know that existed. So thanks for letting me and the listeners know. It's surprising to me that still how many companies struggle to just do that first step of consolidating their data, getting it all together. We deal with this every day with clients and helping them build up data pipelines and get a marketing data warehouse built. So yeah, you got to get that first step in place first.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to say that there's not a ton of other work that goes into the rest of the pipeline, but just being able to log into one place and kind of quickly see some of that information has been a big component of it's that first step in first toe in the water, first step on the trail that kind of gets someone started thinking more data driven. So it's a huge component of what we've been thinking about at Rockerbox as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Rick, for coming on. I do want to mention before I ask you where people can get a hold of you. I know that Rockerbox has Rockerbox Summer Camp coming up, which is
Yeah.
a virtual conference. Is conference the right word? Webinar, conference, conference.
Conference, I think is the right word.
So
We're still new to terminology on this too, but yeah.
yeah, so June 21st and 22nd for B2C performance marketers. You can go to rockerbox.com/summer-camp-2023. Of course, I'll put the link in the show notes. What's the 30-second pitch for what people can get from there?
Summer camp is kind of our. It's actually somewhat similar to just kind of like helping marketers share information. So we're going to be featuring a lot of the brands that we work with use cases of how they're leveraging Rockerbox to help improve different areas of their marketing, and kind of highlighting the different use cases that Rockerbox is helping, and giving that access to our current customers. So we're going to have a whole track for current customers, but also prospective customers that are potentially just dipping their toe in the water. So it's really just, kind of getting a whole bunch of people together, kind of like a summer camp. You meet a whole bunch of different people. We start to build that community across our customers, our prospects, so that you understand and kind of are able to share more of that information. So yeah, this is our first time doing it, but we're really excited about it.
Awesome. Will there be s'mores?
That is a great question, and we probably should. So I'll bring that back to marketing. But we actually have an advertiser that we work with that I believe sells s'mores kits. So
Perfect.
that could be an awesome cross promotional opportunity for us.
Yes, definitely. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Rick. Where can people who want to find out more information or get in touch with you, where can they find you?
So I have LinkedIn. I'm not super active on Twitter, but those are probably the two places where there's limited exposure to Rick on social media. So there you go.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Rick. And
Jim,
glad you could be on the show.
yes, super appreciative of you having me on, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Fantastic. We'll talk to you later.